Hello, I'm Angela Paiva, Chair of the AES New York section. Today's panel is Audiobook Spoken Recording Word with industry experts Erica Glyn, Simon and Schuster, also moderating the panel, Richie Romaniello, Penguin, and Timothy Warner from Audible. We'll take a look at some of the tips, tricks, and techniques involved, as well as their workflow and how they got started, and offer advice for those interested in learning about this field. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Angela. It's good to be here. Good afternoon, guys. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So Richie, why don't we start with you? We'd love to know a little bit about yourself and your background in audio and how you got started and how you ended up in audiobook recording.
Okay. Well, it's actually pretty unusual because, first of all, I didn't even know there was a such thing as a matter of fact, they didn't even call them audiobooks when I started in 1985. But I started as a kid. I had a tape recorder when I was 10 years old and did background for my G.I. Joes, and later moved on to audio letters between my cousin in Las Vegas and myself and my family. And then lo and behold, when I was 26 years old and didn't realize I was going to have a career in audio, got a grant to go to the Institute of Audio Research, got out of there. And since September of 1981, I've been supporting myself as an audio engineer. Originally, I started in the music business at a small studio in New Jersey, where I met my mentor, who was doing a guest engineering job there, and he absolutely hated the studio we were in because he worked at Abbey Road from 1958 to 1968. His name is Malcolm Addy, and we were doing a big band recording of Jimmy McGriff album called Skywalk, and we did it all live in the studio. We had a full horn section of 5 saxes, 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, Kenny Washington on drums, Kenny Werner on piano, Jimmy McGriff on Hammond B3, Jimmy Ponder on guitar, and all in the same room, 24 mics up, going to 24 track machine. And we recorded for 2 days, did 2 punch-ins. That's it, just 2 punch-ins, and mixed on day 3, and the record was done. And I've been Malcolm's assistant since 1983, done about 200 recordings with him. And because I had worked with him, I sent a resume to Bob Katz, the famous mastering engineer, to do location recording with him. And he also did the maintenance for Cadman Records. And they had fired the engineer there in September of 1985, or actually it was probably August. And he suggested me to the people at Cadman Records, and I went in for an interview, got the job, thought I'd do it for 6 months, and I was there for nearly 25 years. Probably recorded about 2,000 audiobooks, or maybe not recorded 2,000, but I've worked on at least 2,000 different titles, either recording, editing, mixing, mastering, remastering, whatever. And absolutely fell in love with spoken word. My first day on the job, Ward Botsford, the executive producer at Cadman at the time, said to me, this isn't like recording Bob Springsteen. You've got to capture, I swear he said that. He said, you got to capture everything from a whisper to a scream, and you can't ride the gain. Yeah. I said, oh. I never heard the term room tone until I stepped into Cadman, but I had no idea. I mean, I knew what ambience was, but I had never heard the term room tone. And it was the first couple of books I did were just amazing. One in particular, and most of the early stuff I worked on came out as LP. But a memorable one that I did was recording Glenn Close reading Sarah Plain and Tall, which she starred in the television movie version of it with Christopher Walken. We did the audiobook first, and that was when we would have music composed for every title, and they were roughly an hour long because it would That's about what you could fit on an LP.
Where was the studio?
We were at Broadway at 68th Street, 1995 Broadway.
Wow.
I recorded in 1988. I recorded JFK Jr. there reading his father's book, Profiles in Courage, and which was the first of 13 Grammy nominated titles I worked on. Now, somewhere on my profile, somewhere on the internet says I worked on a Grammy winning title. That's not true. Okay. I would love to take credit for it, but I didn't. I was working, there were many Grammy winning titles at Cadman and Harper Audio while I was there, but I didn't work on them. So I can't really claim that, but I did work on 13 titles that have been nominated for the Grammys.
So what was the process like? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, it's fine.
What was the process like of putting together an audiobook in the 80s for an LP?
Well, the first thing is there was no such thing as simultaneous release. So I would record a title and I wouldn't edit it for 6 weeks, just do other stuff. I'd work on other stuff. And so what we would do is we would do a rough edit of it. Usually we did a 2-pass edit. You do a rough edit where you got all the outtakes taken care of, and then go back and pace it, because they really, at Cadman, they wanted to eliminate all mouth noises and breaths that stuck out. And, you had to record like an entire reel of room tone, because it's not like you could use the same piece over and over again like you can in a digital workstation. Mm-hmm. And so we would get a rough edit. We would send that to the person we hired to compose for it. They would send back a list. I mean, an hour title would have 10 music cues. Wow. And they would tell you, okay, this starts on paragraph 3 on page 27. And so the music it would be written for that specific point in the book. And on Sarah Plain and Tall, the composer, I can't even remember his name anymore. Somewhere I have his business card. And it was just gorgeous. I mean, it was, real instruments, and it was just beautiful acoustic music. And so once we get that back, very expensive, and we paid terrible. I mean, we paid back then $600 to $750 per title for music, but we only did 30 titles a year then. That's not that much money. Now I'm at Penguin Random House. We might put out 2,000 audiobooks this year.
What was your journey from Cadman to Penguin Random House?
Well, I was at Cadman, became Harper Audio in 1987 when we were purchased by Harper and Row. Then we were purchased by Collins from England, the Rupert Murdoch company, and became Harper Collins. But we maintained the Harper Audio name, and they always maintained, and they still maintain, the Cadman imprint, because they still have audio. Cadman started in 1952 with Dylan Thomas reading A Child's Christmas in Wales. Probably one of the most famous spoken word audio books ever made. And it still sells to this day. And we had a library of about 40,000 reels of tape that I set up in a warehouse in Hackensack, New Jersey. And originally I was going to have the archive moved to the World Trade Center, which would have been rather disastrous, because there was a storage facility below there, a real high-end storage facility, and got obliterated. But it was a real process. We spent time. I would spend days, weeks editing a 1-hour title.
How long would it take to record it? So is it similar?
That particular title, she was interesting because she literally, I'd never seen anybody physically change themselves to become a different character. There are 4 main characters in Sarah Plain and Tall, and I'm talking about Glenn Close. And she would literally, it was like the Elephant Man, in terms of just becoming a different person.
That sounds loud.
Well, it was just, she would just morph into the characters.
Right, but I'm saying her acting.
Yeah, but she wasn't
on the mic.
No? Well, and that was a problem back then, because analog tape, as a matter of fact, that was the first that title is the first time I experienced print through on a analog master. And we were recording then with Dolby SR, which was much better for that sort of thing. But it was just to see that happen and then cut it together and hear this incredible performance then I got it. It took, for me at first it was just a job, and then it became a passion, and I got to work with just some incredible people over the years. Just absolutely incredible. I pinch myself. I mean, I worked with Oliver North while he was on trial. Not that that's something to be necessarily boastful about, but it was just to be in Washington, D.C. while he's on trial and he's recording his audiobook was just a pinch me moment. And I worked elbow to elbow with Rick Harris, who was just the greatest audiobook director and producer I've worked with for 18 years at Harper. So it just was a wonderful time. And he was very responsible for bringing in stage people to do audiobooks. And that has been a big improvement in the wonderful world of audiobooks. I mean, when I started, it was all celebrity talent. It was Christopher Plummer, it was Glenn Close, William F. Buckley, just all these, very well, JFK Jr. And then when I worked with him, then 10 years after that book came out, Caroline Kennedy came into our studios and read a new introduction to it. So I've worked with Newt Gingrich twice. I know. Well,
I know. It's
we're professionals. And I've worked with Donald Trump. I went to Trump Tower and recorded him. All I can say is just what I expected.
Right. Well, I want to get back to you and get into some of these things, but I'd love to find out some about Timothy here and his background. What's your background in audio, and how did you get into the audiobook world?
Sure. Well, I mostly come from like a visual arts, electronic media background. And so that's where I spent a lot of my early years in, eventually ending up teaching at university. And I knew someone who actually worked at Audible, and decided to have him come out to speak to the students about audio, both as a artistic medium, but also as something that someone could have a career in. And in a roundabout sort of way, that actually brought me to Audible itself, where I took what I knew about audio engineering, took what I loved about spoken word and storytelling, and began, it's now like a 10-year journey through the magic of audiobooks and spoken word. Both, starting off as an engineer and as a director, eventually working my way up to celebrity projects, and then things outside of single voice, like multicast narrations and things like this. Taking as many sessions as I could, just because I loved the work, and I loved working with the actors, and I loved working with the technical side of it as well. It was kind of what I liked about, everything I liked about the technical side of audio recording, as well as the experiences of storytelling. It all came together in this particular medium. I really felt like I found what I've been looking for the entire time in my own creative works. And at some point in that journey, I looked around at a few of the other engineers and decided that in addition to the work that I was doing at Audible, we would create our own audiobook studio and work for Audible as a third-party outside studio. And we did, and we actually had 2 different studios here in New York at different times. And unlike a lot of recording studios that I've worked with as a director or as an engineer, our studios were specifically set for audiobook recording only, basically, which I think was a real advantage to what we did. And we were lucky enough to stay busy constantly with all the sessions and emerging projects that were coming through for us from Audible and other clients. A side note to that is that for fun, the thing that everybody knew about me and my own pursuits outside of my love of audio and audiobooks specifically is that I was constantly traveling. And so I'd spend a few weeks every year, or a few months every year, if I was lucky, traveling outside the country. And so at this point, I'm up to about 80 different countries. And this was something that I always just did for fun to sort of gain a better understanding of the world and the people that are in it. But at some point, those two things came together in the sense that Audible was looking for someone who both had an experience in production and was familiar with the Audible way of working, but also someone who didn't mind hopping on a plane and going anywhere in the world to, further our production efforts in different places. Traveling for me for years was really mostly just for fun for myself. But eventually I became lucky in that Audible also needed someone who could go to certain places and talk to these different studios in different parts of the world and use them as production facilities, as third-party production facilities in different areas of the world. And for me, it was like a natural fit because I was able to travel with no compunction. It was easy and I was used to it no matter where it was. But also all of that time that I had spent like running my own studio really allowed me to have these conversations with people in other parts of the world in their studios and basically say, hey, this is how I did it. This is what worked for me. And to be able to field those questions from them as they're learning, in a lot of cases, like a new medium. They may be a studio who had a background in dubbing or had done things for films or other types of audio or even visual recording that needed to learn some of the ways in which we could make audiobooks and not just make them, but also efficiently and ways that made the actors comfortable. And I was able to take all of those things that I'd done previously that I thought didn't connect, like teaching at university, like traveling constantly, and all of the work that I'd done as an engineer and a director, and bring them all together into this new thing. And that's what I still do today.
That's amazing. I like that story and that journey. So what is your typical day like now?
Well,
I mean, maybe not now in the pandemic, but
right.
You know what we're getting at here.
I think I can answer this. Yeah, my typical day now is not typical, unfortunately, due to certain circumstances that we're all still working through. But typically what I would normally do is I would be on the road quite a bit. I would be going as much as 1 or 2 weeks out of every month to different places to speak to the studios, to sit in on sessions, to further our production efforts in different places. And I'm glad that I was able to do that for several years before this happened, because what I do now is fully reliant upon those relationships that I was able to build by showing up to these studios in different parts of the world, making those connections with them. And so that now when we have all of the challenges that we've all faced the last year, I'm able to really know what they're going through. I'm able to have a personal connection with these creatives that we work with. And we're able to continue on production in a lot of ways that, still amaze me it still amazes me how much we've actually been able to accomplish during this really difficult time.
Absolutely. I want to talk about the transition that the field has gone in from, like analog to digital, but I guess I should say a little something about my experience. I, like a lot of engineers, started off as a musician, singer, songwriter, guitarist, and wanted to make my own records and be able to record, and was very interested in the recording process, and started working for a record producer and mix engineer, Bob Power, in Midtown, and was his assistant for a number of years and got a lot of amazing experience there. And he happened to share a studio space with somebody who was going to be recording an audiobook, and they asked me if I wanted to engineer. And I said, sure, I'll make some extra money. That's great. And I ended up doing a good job. And they wanted to keep hiring me. And it was Simon and Schuster. They have a studio in-house, but they also have to rely on a lot of other studios. And so I kept saying yes to them, and they kept asking me. And then eventually I kind of was like, oh, I really like working with these people on interesting and smart projects with interesting and smart people. And, as you both have mentioned, there are some really interesting people that you end up working with. I mean, I really like the in-house team at Simon and Schuster, the executive producer, the other producers, the other engineer, everyone on staff is really fantastic. But then you also work with, like Hillary Clinton or something like that. And that was really interesting. And it was always one of the things I also like about that, the audiobook recording process for me is that it's very intimate. You're spending like a certain amount of time with these people I engineered for a long time at first. I now mostly produce, direct, and do post-production. But, it's you and you're the engineer, the director, producer, and whoever is reading, the reader, and you end up in a very intimate setting with them for 4 or 5 days or however long the book or project is. And so it's been this wonderful part of my life that I have relied upon while I also get to do music and have a family and all these other things that happen in life too. So that's my experience mostly. So we started to talk about, and we all kind of went back in time because I have been doing this for a long time too. And when I started, they were more so called books on tape, that we were not using tape. And now mostly everything is a digital release with some, like download releases as opposed to CD or whatever. Where do you think, and anyone answer, where do we think that do you want to like comment on the transition and where we think things are moving, towards in the future? Can we even guess?
Wow. Well, I mean, no matter what we do with it, it's going to be some sort of downloadable format, I think, going forward. Physical copies. Um,
Do you make physical copies still?
some stuff still comes out as CDs, but
Same.
less and less every release period, so to speak. Um, but it still comes down to until they have artificial intelligence, and I'll be out of the business by then, I'm sure. I know that there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. I mean, we're having people have their stuff proofed with artificial intelligence. There's these proofing companies out there, which actually I didn't realize this until very recently, and I can't imagine how that can replace the real thing. I really don't. It it's not capable of the infinite amount of nuance that a human being can emit. So it's no matter how good it gets, it's still going to be finite. And the thing about human beings is the ability to do things is infinite. And so I'm very grateful that I won't have to be around when they start selling that stuff, because just the concept of it I find disturbing.
Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that aside from like the advances in technology that we're mentioning, I guess the thing that's exciting for me when I think about the future is the idea that more people are going to be able to listen to these works in easier ways. And I also think that I'm also excited by the idea that we're able to, especially in the work that I'm able to do, is that we're also being able to incorporate more stories from more different places and to have those stories be heard by more people. So it's not correct to think that everybody has access to this technology or that it makes it accessible to everyone. But I will say that more and more people have iPhones or similar that are allowing them to hear these things and also to really curate their own sense of listening. I think even what we see with some of the streaming services for video starts incorporating the listening habits of the listeners as well, who also want to hear things in a serial way, or they want to hear a series that has multiple seasons in the same way that they would for the visual medium. So yes, all the technology stuff is interesting, but ultimately I think the thing that I'm excited about is the listening habituation that we're seeing with listeners around the world, and also being able to incorporate these different voices and different languages from, you know, increasingly diverse places.
I mean, that's the thing, right? This is like the oldest, you know,
This is
form.
the oldest
I
art
mean,
form.
yeah,
It is.
exactly. Storytelling.
Right, exactly. And what I would actually like to see is higher resolution audio recording of voices. I've been a proponent of this since I got into the business in 1985. Everybody relegates audio, spoken word audio, to the like lowest common denominator medium of the day, and I find that actually is just it irks me to no end. We have the ability to record very high definition, and storage is cheap, and sending audio is cheap. You know, Cornell University records bird calls at the highest possible resolution in the world. Birds have a lot less frequency range than a human being has, as well as amplitude. And to relegate it to 16-bit 44.1 is a bummer, because there's so much nuance that isn't getting caught. And if you have somebody in a good room, you can really catch so much beautiful nuance.
It's true. It's true. You become really intimate with the dynamics of somebody's voice and range and expression when you just have a really good mic in a quiet room.
Yep. That's the most important thing, the room.
So I'm wondering about, you know, podcasts, as the publishing houses seem to jump on podcasts. You know, Apple added podcasts to iTunes in 2005, and it seems like audio engineers who are working in publishing helped produce and establish podcast standards early on. And now that they're like mainstream in media and our culture, I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on this for the AES members, and also on techniques for recording and working on podcasts.
Well, I don't listen to many podcasts, and I haven't recorded any, but generally what I have listened to, the biggest problem I find with them is people are in rooms that are sheetrock and have no acoustical dampening whatsoever. To me, that's very difficult to listen to, and people often use their computer mic, and it's, you know, and it's not that I'm an audio snob. I don't have a problem with like poor quality. Like a great performance on a mediocre recording is much better than a mediocre performance on a great recording. So you know, content is always the most important thing, but most people's rooms are just too lively, just too weird sounding for my
I
taste.
agree. I've heard that too. Tim, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And I say that as an engineer, and I say that as a fan. I mean, I listen to at least 15 hours of spoken audio a week, probably closer to 20, from all sorts of different sources, including scripted things, unscripted things, podcasts, audiobooks. I mean, I'm fully in there, and I would be doing that even if I wasn't working in the industry. And I fully agree that one of the things, I would say this, when I think about podcasts specifically as a medium, and especially as a listening experience, it reminds me of the early days of the internet, when it democratized ways in which we were able to broadcast our own information without a gatekeeper and put up our own information onto the internet, which was great. At the same time, that was also the difficulty because there was not always that quality that came with it. And so I think when we look at like the older websites from like the 90s and stuff, we sort of see that the quality of them began to improve and a lot of like the poor quality stuff began to fade away. And that's similar to the way I think about a lot of podcasts, in the sense that, you know, even 5 years ago, there was this influx of podcasts. And it was great because we were hearing a lot of new voices. But at the same time, some of those new voices were recorded poorly, or were difficult listening experiences, or the content wasn't great. And so I think that we're at an interesting moment now where a lot of those concerns are actually being addressed, and people are making better sounding podcasts. They're actually having editing that goes along with them. And while those things do not make great content, they certainly can add to that substantially. And I know for me, even if it's someone I'm really interested in hearing as an interview, if they're recorded in a poor way, you know, perhaps I might switch to something else. I'd rather have a mediocre sounding recording and a great performance or a great bit of content than the other way around, as Richie mentioned. But at the same time, like allowing those barriers to fall away and allowing the higher quality content to emerge makes it easier for the listeners to really get in there and enjoy that content.
Yeah,
I know there's a couple that I've been like, I'm just so distracted, and I do recognize that some of it is because of the work that I do.
Right.
But sometimes I'm just like, are you kidding me? Because it's like a famous person, and you're like,
Yeah.
what is happening here? Why is this happening? But yeah, I do wonder how much it is like the audio nerd part getting in the way.
Well, until, most people don't hear the ambience around them in their own homes and out in the world. And then, and the thing is as humans, when you're in that place, we have the ability to discriminate and kind of put that stuff aside and not focus on that. When a microphone can't do that, microphone hears everything as it is. And once you take out the visual experience, and it's a different time and place that you're listening to this audio, all of the stuff in the background becomes much more noticeable.
Absolutely.
And we have the ability to like filter out people's mouth noises when we're talking with them and all that sort of stuff that you don't get.
So speaking of which, let's talk about some technical tools and methods that you use. I mean, are you still doing any hands-on technical work, Tim,
Like
these days?
No, Tim.
Sorry, because
that makes sense.
I assume you are, Richie.
No, go ahead, Tim, first.
Yeah, these days I don't get to work directly in the studio as often as I used to, at least for Audible. I mean, in my own time, as soon as my day is done, I waddle over to my own recording studio and work there all the time. So yes, I'm still constantly working on technical things, and I have my own podcast that I produce and do, front to end, everything in it, including the voice work, the sound, everything else. So I do get to see that. I'm going to keep that separate, that world separate from what I do professionally. However, it's the same thing as it's similar to what I mentioned previously about these things that we do in life that sometimes seem completely separate from what we do professionally, and that we start to understand that they actually play a pretty big role in our understanding of what we do. And so some of the work that I put myself through when I'm doing my own work for fun on the technical side has actually allowed me to be a better engineer and to have those conversations with other creatives who are doing their work.
But can you tell us more specifically things that you're not, you can keep it separate, but tell us about the methods or the tools that you use for recording your podcast and stuff.
Yeah, I'll mention like one technical thing and then one thing that I think surpasses even that. And I will say personally, this is just me speaking personally. I love all of the isotope stuff. I really think it's a it's
Lifesaver.
my it's a lifesaver, and there are plenty of others that are out there too that are also great. But if there's one, when people say, "Can you recommend?" Yeah, I mean, if I point
Which
them to
thing in isotope do you use most?
RX and ozone
Mm-hmm.
constantly. I think they make a huge difference, and there's a lot of other great ones as well. But those are the two that I've relied on in different versions for the last 10 years. And they make such a difference, and it's like a magic spell when someone hasn't used one of those or something similar to it, and they first discover it. And this is something that I encounter quite a lot as I'm working with people who are new to the audiobook medium. They see that and they're like, wow, I wish I would have known about this particular tool or a tool like this before. But I think even beyond any specific plugins or anything like that, the thing that I always say is, when we are working in audio, we're creating like a magic spell that's really intimate for the listeners. And that anytime that there's something that breaks that magic, that's what needs to be looked at. People say, do I need to cut out every breath? Do I need to cut out all the mouth noise, all that other stuff? And, some clients prefer it that way. That's totally great.
Right.
But for me, it's like, is this a noise? Is this a performance question? Is this a voice choice that is going to be distracting, that I think is going to pull the listener out of that moment and break that spell? And if it is, I feel like that's the thing that needs to be focused on. A lot of the other stuff, I mean, aside from us that are in the industry, that are listening for this, that are trained engineers, a lot of that stuff is going to be lost on the average listener. But if there are distracting elements in that break the spell, those are the things that need to be dealt with so that they can have a seamless experience.
Absolutely. The better the editor and the edit, the less you know they were there. And it's amazing. Sometimes I'd labored for days and days and days on short titles, because it was that much work to really do that much editing, but make it sound like there wasn't that much editing. And a lot has to do with the performance, but you can mangle a performance with bad editing, or you can enhance a performance with good editing.
Absolutely. What are you working on?
Me
Pro
myself?
Tools? No, yeah, I don't mean a project. I just meant like, are you, yeah.
I work on Pro Tools. I learned on Sonic Solutions back in 1995, because at that time, Harper, we bought 3 workstations, Sonic Solutions. They were the only one that had a software-based denoising program called No Noise, and their editor was the best editor I've ever worked on.
So wait, Richie, your experience must be just incredible to go from slicing tape to isotope.
Well, the first thing we switched to digital at Harper in 1995. I was 40
Wow.
years old. I'd never really worked on a computer, so I had to learn computers and digital audio workstation at the same time. And at that time, the way Sonic Solution worked is your EDL was kept in a separate place from the sound files. And so, I would save a project and I couldn't find it. I mean, I was completely computer illiterate. And so it was a real challenge. And
That's
Sonic
amazing.
Solutions was not an easy, intuitive workstation. It was a great workstation, but it was not easy. Pro Tools was much more like attuned to the analog engineer moving to the digital world. It mimicked the analog world better than other. But now it's become a very good thing, and I like it just as much. So I use that. I do location recording. I have a 24-track machine that I use to do music recording live. And that's an Alesis. That's a lot of fun to do.
It's so fascinating. I can just imagine. I think it's and that's an incredible journey, Richie. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I kind of want to get to something that I think maybe people would be really interested in terms of like actual work. So work is generally freelance, with some positions available for full-time audio engineers and producers. Um, Now you guys are both full time. I am not. I'm a freelancer. So do you guys have any advice for people starting out who are looking for work in this field, or perhaps would like to learn techniques for spoken word recording?
Well, I'll go first if you don't mind. I mean, at Penguin, we use and our New York studios operate slightly differently than our California studios. We have 4 rooms in New York, and we have 10 rooms in California. In New York, generally there's a director and an engineer, two humans, as well as the talent. In California, most of the directors also run Pro Tools, and there's my colleague there is their safety net if Pro Tools crashes or they have trouble sending files. So there's in New York, generally we have 2 sets of ears listening as it's being recorded, and generally the engineer is marking the script. So what in the California, the director is running Pro Tools, marking the script, sending the files. They're doing a lot more work there, in that sense. So we do use freelancers at our New York studios. Whenever they open, there'll be some work there, no doubt. And I would think, CDM, JMM, they have staff people, but there's so much content now that I do think there's a lot of work out there. I really do. It just takes some work to get used to it. You can't just edit an audiobook. I've had this happen where I suggested people apply to edit audiobooks, and the first couple times you edit one, you mangle it. You have to get it. It's an acquired learning. Same thing with recording it. A lot of people record too tight. I like a little air. Because it's storytelling, it's not selling, it's not a voiceover, and a lot of people mic it like it's a voiceover, and I try to stay away from that.
That's good advice. Tim, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I would say, we'll put it this way, like I do a lot of work in India, and I think that's the most vivid example of incorporating all these different disciplines in what one works at. And so when I work with a lot of the studios there, the studios themselves, not only are they doing the work for us, but they're doing all sorts of stuff with film and movies and dubbing and music and sound design and video games and all these other things. And what I think that is exciting about that situation is that when I have a opportunity to do something outside of just a single voice narration, there's a very good chance that they'll be able to do the sound effects or be able to incorporate music. And I think that that's an interesting way to think about it, even just as an individual engineer, in that you should definitely be focused and competent at the things that you're interested and good at the same time, like having some of these other special skills. We're at a moment now where we're getting to incorporate so many of those in what we do in the audio medium. So having some additional ability in sound design or music or directing or even voiceover yourself, I think that allows you to be even more viable to someone who's looking for those skills. So, and the other thing that's really great is, aside from like any sort of formal education, anything that you want to learn how to do in a DAW or with a microphone or a piece of gear, there's so many great tutorials and resources out there. So there's a lot of learning by doing, even creating your own podcast, even creating your own test recordings for voice will tell you as an engineer how to be better at those skills. Even if you have no intention of ever being a voiceover artist or a voice artist yourself, even going through that exercise will allow you to be further educated so that when you're on the other side of the glass, you have an understanding on some level of what that artist might be going through and how you can best support them.
I often do that. Since I started doing audiobooks, I every so often I take a couple of pages into the booth and just try to read it, just to understand, like you say. And sometimes, for me, the words start moving on the page, and so you understand why people get bleary and that sort of thing. It's hard work to
It
do.
is, it's really hard work.
People think it's easy. It's
the other thing I
hard.
want to add to this, as now a director, producer, you know, it's not just the technical thing that someone is looking for in an engineer, but it's also the personality, and how you work with a producer and how you support them, or as producer director. Having a grasp on the English language, if that's what you're recording is English, helps too. And working with the actor or celebrity or author or whoever it is, being able to trust that person alone in the room with Uma Thurman or
Yeah,
Hillary
right.
Clinton or whoever.
Mhm.
I mean, not that she would be alone because she's Secret Service, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Whoever it is, that is also a really, really important part of being in the room.
Absolutely.
So I would just add that. From my experience, wanting to do something is a huge motivator. And if you really want to do it, you're going to find ways to do it. And as you go through your journey, you might want to do something different than you thought you wanted at the beginning. Again, like I really liked a lot of the people I was working with at Simon and Schuster kind of more than the people in the music world at times. And that was a pull for me,
Mhm.
and there's a lot more to be said on that. But, I worked freelance at a lot of studios and I kind of really liked working with the people at Simon Schuster. So I kept saying, I'm available whenever you want. Oh, 2 shifts back to back. Great. Oh, 8 days a week. Great. I'm yours,
Yeah.
So I think that there's that, ambition, motivation, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
And
I
as
couldn't
you
agree. Oh,
go ahead.
sorry
No.
to interrupt, but I was just going to say I couldn't agree more, and that's exactly what worked for me as an engineer, because I am not a trained professional engineer. I could not mic a drum set if I needed to, but I was able to take the skills that I had and just take as many sessions as were available to me. And I was lucky in that when I came in, there were quite a few holes in the schedule, and I would always be the person that signed up for those ones, doubles and weekends and 8 days a week and all the stuff that you mentioned. And I think that made a big difference in my viability as a freelance person. And I can also say that similar attitude is something I see in the booth as well with the actors. You can tell, especially with celebrities, there are certain celebrities or actors that are there because they want a paycheck or they feel like their agent put them up to it, and that's great. And you can work with them and get them through that and support them in whatever way you can. But at the same time, when you can always tell when someone really has a connection to the material and is really passionate about actually giving the best performance there. And they may not necessarily be the best or natural performer, but just knowing that they have that correct attitude, that right attitude, that they want to make this as excellent as they can for the listeners, it makes such a difference.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're out of time now. Was there anything else that either one of you wanted to just close with, or I think we really covered a lot.
Richie, do you have any stories about recording Orson Welles?
I didn't record Orson Welles, but I have this outtake. Have you ever heard the outtakes?
I'm fully obsessed with the outtakes, and I just shot in the dark. Was curious if you happened to be around during that time.
We did a recording at Harper that was by Peter Bogdanovich that was about Orson Welles, but I didn't get to work with him. I think one of the
Wait, what's famous about this? Or I don't know these.
You've never heard the Orson Welles outtakes? Oh
No.
my
Amazing.
God, they're on YouTube somewhere,
Okay.
and there's a Pinky in the Brain parody that's almost word for word of this bunch of commercials that Orson Welles is reading, and he is every engineer's nightmare on this recording. And I've had sessions like that where working with a well-known star, I actually thought I was going to have to fight. He was so crazy.
Yeah, there are definitely some interesting personalities you run into.
Oh my God. And I worked with a guy who literally punched himself because he was so upset with his performance.
Wow. Yeah.
But
all right. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I have really enjoyed learning about both of you and your experiences. And I think we're going to be doing a Q&A, so stick around.
Okay.
And thanks to Angela Paiva and AES New York.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody.
Well, hey there.
So I'm Roy Shamir, and I'm part of the AES New York section. We present these events for you guys and hope you enjoy them. Today, we're going to do a little live Q&A with two of our panelists. Unfortunately, Erica could not make it today, but she's here with us in spirit, and we hope everybody enjoyed the webcast. I think everybody had really great insight and information about their side of how they do things, which is great. Very insightful. Really appreciated it. Enjoyed it tremendously. I personally don't have that much recording audiobook experience, but my better two-thirds, Angela Paiva, our chairman, and I'll just clarify it now, it is Paiva, not Piva, for those that are confused. Just think of the number pi mathematically and you'll remember. Anyway, she's the one with quite a bit of great audio book experience, some of it in a shared space with Richie. So I know a little bit about it peripherally. Of course, recording is recording, and some of the tips you guys gave, like going out on the mic yourself and testing things out, or going out and playing the drums for a minute, even if you really can't play them, after you've mic'd them up and you've got everything where you think it should be, if you're sitting around and it's there, it's very informative to kind of learn what the players are hearing, what the actors and the people are contributing. So anyway, enough about me contributing to this discussion. If you guys would like to add anything else, related or unrelated, I definitely want to remind everybody of Timothy's amazing travel experience, and it's pretty astounding stuff when he gets into it. I'm sure the book, if he hasn't written it already, which I should know, will be great. And if you guys, either of you would like to add anything, please do. In the meantime, I'm fielding Facebook for any questions. So if you have any other experiences or stories, by the way, Richie, we told everybody what an EDL is.
Oh, okay.
As an edit decision list,
Right.
as we all know from working in Sonics over the years, and other places. A fancy name for playlist.
I actually think Pro Tools, or when they were Sound Tools, called it that as well.
I think you might be right, because I actually did work with it at version 1, so could be the case that Sound Tools was there. Let me see, I'm just looking at the comments. Forgive me for multitasking.
No, it's fine.
See if there's any questions here. Oh, of course, we're getting comments about our dueling ribbon mic shirts. So
Right.
that was not planned, for all of you to know.
Right.
And Richie was just keeping continuity
That's right.
from the original recording date in order to give the perception of it being one live date. And we're sorry if anyone was upset with us for having partially webcast this event, but we're following in the footsteps of AES, because much of AES, if you've attended it online, is very much a hybrid of webcasts and live discussions afterwards. So we're just following the... let's see. Michael Jung is asking, what are some of the mistakes a regular engineer makes when they first do an audiobook? That may be hard for either of you to reflect on, because you may have to look far back, but please take it.
I could do this, and I think from a unique perspective, because as I mentioned on the video, I am not necessarily a formally trained engineer in the same way that a lot of people that I work with are, which I think has its ups and downs. But I would say that sometimes if someone is very trained and knowledgeable about a lot of the equipment and everything else, I think there's sometimes where we can get lost in that. I think everyone's probably done it where they've tried to over-engineer something. And then in a lot of ways, I'd rather have someone do too good of a job than not of a good enough job. But yeah, overall, I mean, I think like if we're doing our jobs right, especially for audiobooks, like all of the gear and all of the stuff that adds up to it is important, but it does fade away and let the performance rise to the top, you know? And if someone's overly concerned about every small thing, they may miss the big picture. So yeah, sometimes I see that and I respect that training, always respect that training, and especially for someone who's really good at music or other types of recording. But sometimes, sometimes like the simple answer is the best answer. And I think that applies to audiobooks sometimes from an engineer's perspective.
So sort of a KISS mentality, keep it simple.
Yeah, pretty much. But, you know, I mean, I came from a music background, and I really didn't get a whole lot of instruction when I got to Cadman. And, you know, looking back at that, you know, there were things I was just totally unaware of. You know, I mean, I knew about room ambience, but, you know, the kind of stuff I did, you know, you really didn't hear a whole lot of room ambience. You know, everything we did was, for the most part, artificial reverb. You know, it was either a plate or electronic reverb. We had a room that had tile in it that was originally a bathroom that we would put guitar amps in every once in a while. But for the most part, you know, we had a pretty dead studio that I worked in. And then I started doing spoken word, and of course at Cadman, they recorded in stereo when I first started, which was really weird. They used a stereo Neumann mic in MS, which is mid-side, and doing, you know, when the actor would move, if you had a pickup down the line that their head wasn't in the same exact place, you'd get this weird shift in if you were listening in headphones, which you got when you listen to high-speed mass-produced cassettes as well. So, we've come a long way since then. So, you know, it's a little, rooms are a lot deader now. A lot of places have these prefab booths, you know, whisper rooms, studio bricks, IAC, and makes a big difference. Now they're recorded in a much more dead environment, which is fine, you know, because then you can kind of, if you really need to treat it, it's easy to do.
Very good. I want to maybe answer that question, even though I admittedly said I don't have a lot of audiobook experience. I do actually have a lot of voiceover experience, and again, I told you about my peripheral experience to audiobooks, so I would just add a couple things. As a newbie, you may not realize you should really record about a minute at least of the room with nothing going on. That's called a room tone. That is essential for the post-production editing of the audiobook to sound natural. And, you know, make sure that if the AC was on when you recorded the voice, the AC is on when you record the room tone. If the room, it was a problem, make a sample of it fixed if you can, but remember to include it, especially how it was, because that is essential for a good edit. Of course, with isotope and stuff, we can all fix these things much easier now, but you want to keep it natural. So that's my one point. And my next one would be, you have to learn how to mark the script. That is an essential skill for an engineer that we normally don't have to do much of. Although, if you think about it, if you do a lot of vocal comping in the R&B and rock world, no one wants to admit how many vocals it might take sometimes. You wish it was one, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's many. You have to keep kind of tabs on the one that made the producer or co-producer or composer or artist kind of smile so that you can find it. And of course, in Pro Tools, that's very easy to do with playlist editing. The other thing that I learned along the way was a Pixar technique, and I've used it for hip hop. And the Pixar technique, what I call the Pixar technique, is a close microphone and a microphone about a foot or two away and above. And this allows you to not worry if the artist or actor screams or does something dynamically dangerous, because then you have both mics to choose from and fix. And I could tell you that I have applied this with some hip-hop artists that are real screamers, and I never want to change their style. So I will actually put a dynamic condenser close to them and a condenser about a foot and a half away. And let's face it, air is a good thing when we record, right? I mean, this is something that works with audiobooks and record making. And last thing is, stay away from those dynamics. Don't print with too much compression. Don't ever think about putting noise gate or encoding of any kind.
Yeah.
Make sure it's just the mic as much as you can, a good mic pre, a good mic in the best place in the best room you can. That's my 2 cents. Sorry to interject so much. But as a fellow engineer, I felt I should share that. So let's just see, is there any other questions? All that babbling didn't allow me to monitor. Boop, 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 boop. Sorry. Thing with Facebook is the comments are live, and then there's also comments that people typed in from their desktop. So I got to make sure I'm checking both.
Mentioning that, I might mention one other thing, which is
sure.
While on one hand we have, like, as I mentioned, like that thing I mentioned about over-engineering certain situations, under-engineering is not helpful either. And I think especially like generationally, there's a lot of, especially when I was teaching, I found that a lot of the students who had access to a lot of this equipment early on didn't always necessarily understand the power of what that equipment was. And I think for some of us who came up in a time where equipment was scarce and expensive, to have all these options at our fingertips now is exciting and interesting and wonderful, and allows for so much more to happen. But there's not always that appreciation for the equipment either, or the setup or the technique. And so it's easy to record. It makes everything so much easier to record, which is great. You don't necessarily need to be fully trained as an engineer to do certain things, especially for audiobooks. But to underplay that doesn't help anybody either. And in fact, just makes it so much harder. So while I would say if someone's like fidgeting with the mic too much, that makes me a little bit nervous. Someone who's not fidgeting with the mic at all would make me more nervous. So yeah, I mean, it's about applying like the right thing for the situation, I think.
Right. You could tell, I mean, if the engineer has worked the room or is a part of the room staff, then you can kind of have some faith that they already know where's the right place to put things in the room. But yeah, you'd like to see people show an interest and listen to what's, first of all, like Al Schmidt always said, go out in the frickin' room and see what it sounds like, and then go in the control room and make it sure it's captured and sound good. All right, so we have another question from our good friend Michael Zhang, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He wants to know, I know, Richard, you mentioned MS mid-side, but he's asking more basically, do you record in mono now?
Yes. We straight ahead mono. It's single large diaphragm microphone. We use it. All of our studios have a TLM 103 and an Avalon 737, and then they go into Pro Tools M-Box, which will change very soon to, I believe, they're thinking about using Universal Audio's boxes. So, but yeah, it's pretty straight. You know. Not too many things in between, and we don't do a lot of processing with the Avalon, just a little low-end roll-off and a little compression to keep it from getting out of control, and that's it. And it's all about the room, really. That's the most important thing.
I guess in that case, having the right gobos if the room isn't great.
Right.
And having the right mic reflector if the room isn't great. So, okay, well, I don't know if we have any other questions. Maybe my fellow cohort here, do you see anything else? I, too, am eager to hear the Orson Welles outtakes. I did hear many an outtake in my life.
They're hysterical.
Like from the Trogs arguing, which inspired...
I love that one.
That inspired Rob Reiner to do Spinal Tap, as most of us know. And I feel like Spinal Tap inspired Fear of a Black Hat, which is another amazing spoof movie. So... No. It doesn't seem like there's any other questions, but this was great. Everybody, we really appreciate your insight and perspective and stories, and love the fact that you guys have these great gigs at Simon and Schuster, Penguin, and Audible, of course. Yeah. And keep on rocking in the free world. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll hope to see you around again at another cool event, whether it be live in person or on the Zoom room here at AES New York Live. I want to thank all the section officers and members, participants that will be tagged properly at the end of this, because we didn't do it right as we started the broadcast. Sorry about that. And thanks, everyone. Have a great day. And we'll end the stream here, and we'll have a little private party for a second. Thanks, guys.